Our answer is no. So, the decision I made was Hello everybody, we're going to hit you up with another presidential election. This one, the election of 1896. This is a very important election, all new candidates going at it for the presidency. Let's see who comes out on top right now. Now, as always, we're going to start off with the incumbent party, and this time it's the Democrats. The Democratic incumbent, Grover Cleveland, elected in 1892, but almost instantly he gets socked with an economic panic that makes him and his gold-silver policies unpopular. So come the Democratic National Convention, populist ideals that are coming from the South and out West takes control of the Democratic National Convention and really the Democratic Party until the 1920s, and they repudiate Cleveland himself and the gold standard. So this leaves the convention wide open. We have William Jennings Bryan of Nebraska, Richard P. Blaine of Missouri, Robert E. Pattison of Pennsylvania, Kentucky Senator John C.S. Blackburn, Horace Boyes of Iowa, John R. McLean of Ohio, the governor of Indiana, Claude Matthews, and Sylvester Pennoy of Oregon. Now, William Jennings Bryan, he's 36 years of age, and he's a superb orator. He's been an attorney, he's a former congressman from Nebraska, and a successful Senate candidate. He spoke for the farmers who were suffering from the economic depression following the Panic of 1893, and he delivered his Cross of Gold speech. At the Democratic National Convention, he presents a passionate defense of farmers and factory workers struggling to survive the economic depression, and he attacked big city business owners and leaders as the cause of much of their suffering. He called for reform of the monetary system and end to the gold standard and government relief efforts for farmers and others hurt by the economic depression. Now, Bryan's speech was so dramatic that many delegates ended up carrying him on their shoulders around the convention hall, so Bryan ends up getting the Democratic nomination. He's also nominated by the Populist Party, so he runs on a fusion ticket in this election. William Jennings Bryan, who's going to bring along for the ride Arthur Sewell of Maine as his running mate. William Jennings Bryan, at the age of 36, is the youngest nominee of any major political party. Now that we have our Democratic ticket of Bryan and Sewell, let's go to the Republicans. Now, the Republicans put out their own list of candidates. They are William McKinley of Ohio, the Speaker of the House, Thomas Brackett Reed of Maine, Pennsylvania Senator Matthew S. Quay, the Governor of New York, Levi P. Morton. Remember, he was Vice President under Benjamin Harrison, the previous Republican president, and Iowa Senator William B. Allison. At the end of the day, it is going to be McKinley who receives the nomination for the Democrats, and he's going to bring along for the ride Garrett Hobart of New Jersey as his running mate. Now that we got our Democratic ticket of Bryan and Sewell and our Republican ticket of McKinley and Hobart, let's put these guys into the ring and let's see who comes out on top. Now, before we get into the campaign, this is a really important election, so we're going to do a special thing here and talk about campaign strategies. While the Republican Party entered 1896 assuming that the Democrats were in shambles and victory would be easy, the national emotional response to the Bryan candidacy changed everything. By the time summer rolled around, it appeared that Bryan was ahead in the South and West and probably also in the Midwest. An entirely new strategy was called for by the McKinley campaign, and it was designed to educate voters in the money issues, to demonstrate civil rights fallacies, and to portray Bryan himself as a dangerous crusader. McKinley would end up being portrayed as the safe and sound champion of jobs and sound money, with his high tariff proposals guaranteed to return prosperity for everyone. The McKinley campaign would be national and centralized, using the Republican National Committee as the tool of the candidate instead of the state party's tool. Furthermore, the McKinley campaign stresses for Arras' commitment to prosperity for all groups, including minorities. Now, a new form of campaign financing is invented by the McKinley campaign, and we still have this today, in which instead of asking office holders to return a cut of their pay, Mark Hanna, who is the campaign manager for William McKinley, went to financiers and industrialists and made a business proposition, in which he explained that Bryan would win if nothing happened, and that the McKinley team had a winning counterattack that would be very expensive. He would then ask them how much it was worth to the business not to have Bryan as president. He suggested an amount and was happy to take a check. Hanna had moved beyond partisanship and campaign rhetoric to businessmen's thinking about how to achieve a desired result, and it ended up raising about $3.5 million in this campaign, and he spent about $2 million at that in Chicago. Now, meanwhile, traditional funders of the Democratic Party, mostly financiers from the Northeast, ended up rejecting Bryan, although he did manage to raise about $500,000, and some of it came from businessmen with interests in silver mining. Remember, William Jennings Bryan advocated for free silver. The financial disparity grew larger and larger as the Republicans funded more and more rallies, speeches, and torchlight parades, as well as hundreds of millions of pamphlets that attacked Bryan and praised McKinley. So, lacking a systematic fundraising system, Bryan was unable to tap his potential supporters, and he had to rely on passing the hat at rallies. So, obviously, a big disparity in spending when it comes to William Jennings Bryan. But also, the Republicans attacked him as a dangerous religious fanatic, and they focused on Bryan as a reckless revolutionary whose policies would destroy the economic system. Now, the Democratic Party in eastern and midwestern cities had a strong German Catholic base that was alienated by free silver and inflationist pansias, so they showed little enthusiasm for Bryan, although many were worried that a Republican victory would bring prohibition into play. The Irish Catholics disliked Bryan's revivalistic rhetoric and worried about prohibition as well. However, their leaders decided to stick with Bryan since the departure of so many bourbon businessmen from the party left the Irish increasingly in control. Now, the Bryan campaign appealed first of all to farmers, obviously. It told urban workers that the return to prosperity was possible only if the farmers prospered first. But juxtaposing our farms in your cities in a speech that he delivered in Chicago did not go over well in the cities, and they ended up voting for McKinley. Now, the main labor unions were reluctant to endorse Bryan because their members feared inflation. Railroad workers especially worried that Bryan's silver programs would bankrupt the railroads, which were in a shaky financial condition in the Depression and whose bonds were payable in gold. Factory workers saw no advantage in inflation to help miners and farmers because their urban cost of living would shoot up and they would be hurt. And the McKinley campaign gave special attention to skilled workers, especially in the Midwest and adjacent states. Secret polls show that large majorities of railroad and factory workers voted for McKinley. Now that we have some of the campaign strategies that both of these guys used, Bryan and McKinley, let's get into the campaign. Now, throughout the campaign, the South and Mountain States appeared certain to vote for Bryan. Remember, the South was a Democratic bastion, and the Mountain States were those old populist strongholds. Remember, William Jennings Bryan was running on a fusionist ticket with the Democrats and the populists. Whereas the East was certain for McKinley. The East was predominantly Republican, so it played with the Midwest and the border states. Now, as I've said earlier, the Republican Party amasses an unprecedented war chest on the local level, the state level, and the national level, so outspent and shut out of the party's traditional newspapers William Jennings Bryan decides his best chance to win the election was to conduct a vigorous national speaking tour by train. His fiery crusading rhetoric to huge audiences would make his campaign a newsworthy story that the hostile press would have to cover, and he could speak to the voters directly instead of through editorials. He became the first ever candidate to crisscross the nation and meet voters in person, and he was the first presidential candidate since Stephen A. Douglas back in 1860 to canvass directly. And he would focus his efforts on the Midwest, which everyone agreed would be the decisive battleground in the election. Now, in contrast to Bryan's method of campaigning, McKinley just stayed home. He stayed home in Canton, Ohio. He conducted a front porch campaign, and his well-organized staff prepared both the remarks of the visiting delegations and the candidates' responses, focusing the comments on the assigned topic of the day. The remarks were issued to the newsmen and telegraphed nationwide to appear in the next day's papers. Meanwhile, William Jennings Bryan, he practically didn't have a staff. He didn't have a well-structured campaign, so he gave pretty much the same talk over and over and over and over again. And McKinley labeled Bryan's proposed social and economic reforms as a serious threat, to the national economy. With the Depression following the Panic of 1893 coming to an end, support for McKinley's more conservative economic policies increased, while Bryan's more radical policies began to lose support among Midwestern farmers and factory workers. Now, to ensure victory, Mark Hanna Remember, McKinley's campaign manager, paid large numbers of Republican orators to travel around the nation to denounce Bryan as a dangerous radical. And one of these orators was Theodore Roosevelt. He'll be playing a big role in the next election, 1900, and the events that followed that. Now, there were also reports that some potentially Democratic voters were intimidated into voting for McKinley. For example, some factory owners posted signs the day before the election announcing that if Bryan won the election, the factory would be closed and the workers would lose their jobs. And with that in mind, let's get to the results. Now, William McKinley and the Republicans are going to come out with a win in this one. 271 electoral votes for William McKinley, as the Republicans are back in power. William Jennings Bryan in the Democratic Populist Fusionist ticket, receiving 176 electoral votes. 23 states going for McKinley, 22 going for William Jennings Bryan. In terms of the popular vote, it is 51% for McKinley and 46.7% for William Jennings Bryan. Now, this is a big election because this marks the beginning of a fourth-party system. From 1896 until FDR's election in 1892, the Republicans were in control of the White House for 28 of the next 36 years. The only interruption is the two-term presidency of Woodrow Wilson, which we'll get to in 1912 and then in 1916, which we'll talk about tomorrow, actually. So, big election in American history, big realigning election, and William McKinley is the president. Coming up next time, we'll be talking about the election in 1900 as William McKinley goes for the second term. With that, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you get a lot out of it. If you haven't seen any of my previous videos, go ahead and watch those if you want. And with that, we will see you next time.